Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And I know there'll probably be some others that are going to join soon, but thank you for all the panelists for coming on because this is a big deal. This is the first time we've ever done anything like this. So I'm like touched and excited and it's going to be fun. We're going to all learn a ton. But really we're here for you, the audience, to ask questions. Like we're excited that you took the course and this is the first time where, now that you've taken a course, you probably have questions, right? And so we're here to be able to answer the questions. You could ask the speaker directly your question. You can ask many of the speakers questions. We'll probably start asking questions of each other, right? Like, because that's kind of what happens in every conversation, that we're all passionate about the subject. So it starts going, well, I thought it was like this instead. And so I want to thank everyone. And I know folks at least on the West Coast are getting off of work, so others will be joining slowly. But this is going to be a conversation where this is super informal. We're here to answer questions, have conversations amongst ourselves about cannabis and veterinary medicine. I mean, that is really the goal of this. And the basic course that we all taught was a 7-hour module where we really put together the science, some of the clinical experience, the toxicology, and then, also the legal aspect, which is humongous, right? I mean, that's one of the main reasons why some veterinarians are nervous to talk about cannabis. And so there's been some legal changes since then, federally and statewide. And so we can talk a little bit about that as well. There's been some publications that Dr. Booth may, bring up since she's presented her lecture. And so we have we'll have a lot to talk about, and I think the time will go by pretty quick. So I wanted to start off by welcoming everyone. Thank you, VIN, for hosting this. We were psyched to be able to partner with you on this and get the word out in a bigger platform. And so thank you for hosting this and getting everyone together. I'll start off by introducing myself. I'm Dr. Trina Hazat. I am a veterinary integrative oncologist, and I've been doing cannabis medicine for several years now. And I actually left the typical conventional oncology practice and do mostly cannabis medicine and cannabis consultations for pet parents. And I help some companies with formulations and like doing some research and kind of dabbling, just anything that has to do with cannabis and veterinary medicines become my passion and my jam. So that's me. And I'm the president and a co-founder of the Veterinary Cannabis Society, who is working with VIN to put this together and worked with them to create this awesome course. So I'm going to just go down the list. I guess, why don't we go in the order of the lecture? So Dr. Andre, do you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll just go down in that order of the lectures?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Kasara Andre. I'm a practicing veterinarian in Colorado, and I'm so pleased to be on a panel with so many friends, and I think faces that I know by reputation, but actually haven't had a chance to be in a discussion on. So I'm thrilled to be here, excited to answer new questions that come up, address questions that came from the original lecture. Like Trina said, I think everyone on this call has a passion for cannabis and how it affects our animals and their well-being. So we're excited to engage with you all and share some knowledge across both ways.
Awesome. Thank you. Dr. Richter, looks like you got something in your mouth there, sir.
You caught me snacking after work. Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Gary Richter. I'm a veterinarian in the San Francisco Bay Area. Along with Dr. Hazat, we are two of the founding members of the Veterinary Cannabis Society. I'm an integrative practitioner, so I do a lot of both Western and alternative medicine in my office. And I've been using cannabis in my patients for the better part of the last 10 years, been pretty involved. Particularly with the legislative side of things in California. So it's been a sort of a long and winding road, if you will, to kind of get to where we are today. So it's really exciting to be able to present this kind of information to you guys in this kind of forum with VIN behind us. It's a great moment for us, and I think it's a great moment for the profession. To have arrived at this place where we can talk about cannabis in such a professional and really organized setting. So thrilled to be here, and can't wait to see what kind of questions you guys have.
Okay, and then I think, is it Holly? You're next, I think, on the list. So I think our Miss Toxicologist, Dr. Toxicologist, go for it.
Hey everybody, my name is Holly Hummerding. I'm one of the senior veterinary toxicologists at Pet Poison Helpline and Safety Call International, but at the root of it, I'm a general practitioner at heart. I started my first 8 to 10 years of my career in general practice in a lower income area in the suburbs of Minneapolis, and still adore that to the nth degree, but I'm very happy to have landed in toxicology. And early in my career in general practice, got to dabble in cannabis use in a lot of my elder patients. A lot of my geriatric patients and their families were very interested, and I got to learn right along with them. And then under the guidance and tutelage of my mentor and my colleague and my friend, Dr. Anna Brutlog, have gotten further into the cannabis world on the toxicology side, and I adore it. I'm primarily in the call center, so if my name seems familiar and you have called into Pet Poison Helpline for various tox cases, you have very likely chatted with me about some very, very fun topics. But I'm excited to be here tonight specifically to chat about cannabis with you guys. So thanks for having me.
Thank you, Holly. Dr. Booth?
Hi, guys. So thank you for joining us, and I look forward to hopefully learning from some of our participants that took the course, as well as, of course, the rest of the panel members. So my training is first as an internist and then a clinical pharmacologist. And I jokingly tell people when they ask what I do drugs. I do good drugs, and that always gets a laugh. But when I got my fat cat on my lap, but when I look at what I have brought to our profession, or at least what I've tried to bring to our profession, this group of therapeutic interventions represents much of what I've tried to do. And that is step back, looking at this new or a new exciting therapeutic intervention, look at the physiology, the pathology behind it, look at the diseases that we're trying to treat, and then look at the pros and cons. So I try very, very hard to bring a balanced perspective to the table, not bias from a drug company, not bias from anybody. And so I've been really pleased to be able to do that with this team, just because I think this group of compounds, however we're going to call them, there's a lot of hype behind them, but there's a lot of emotional misinformation behind them as well. And this format here gives us an opportunity to try and wade through all of that stuff and do what we all want to do, and that is make our patients feel better and do better, and their pet owners as well. So I'm happy to be here, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Dawn. I think Jeff Pollard, Dr. Pollard, I think you're next.
Hi, everybody. Dr. Jeff Pollard. I'm a veterinarian, small animal in the San Diego area. And I got involved in this world having served on a committee of the California Veterinary Medical Board some 5-6 years ago, when one of several legislative bills and then subsequent laws got passed and then punted to the board to make rules about. And I met Trina and Gary in that ambient in 2018. And I like to say I didn't know how to spell cannabis at that point. So it's been a learning process, and it continues to be. But California has, fortunately, if you're in California, surpassed every other state with regard to its legislative bills and passage, and literally has addressed what veterinarians can do and say and now even recommend. So I am always on the lookout for what bills are on the table in other states. I'm sure some of you know there are the majority of states permitting cannabis, not just hemp, for medical use, and about 50% have passed laws permitting it for recreational use. This doesn't refer to animals, but you can see the trend. So I'm very excited to be here with all of you. I've listened to every single one of these panelists at VMX or at Western, some of you, Dr. Booth, multiple times, and always learn something new.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Dr. Lance Rosa.
Hello, thank you, and pleasure to be here with you. My name is Lance Rosa. I'm a veterinarian, and my practice career actually started in Colorado, and this is kind of how I became interested and involved. In 2008-9, Charlotte's Web was actually based in my practice area in Colorado, so I had a ton of clients that were using CBD, for their children at the time, and started sharing anecdotal evidence then. Later on, I went to law school and became an attorney. And my practice 100% serves veterinarians. And so I spent a lot of time thinking and talking and consulting with veterinarians on their various legal questions. I'm one of the consultants on the regulatory and legal boards and practice management boards. And so, obviously we have a lot of questions over there about what are the legal aspects and things. So I guess in summary, my heart as a general practitioner, starting in Colorado, but my professional career has taken me on the legal side, where I get to read about and analyze the laws and regulations associated with cannabis, both on the THC and CBD side.
Thank you. All right, so what I'm thinking we should do is we're gonna just open it up for questions. It looks like we have one question to start, so I can read it out loud and then, but please, like everyone just start throwing in questions. And then maybe Sierra, as we start getting some more folks, what we can do is send out a poll question, but let's get a few more people before we do that. All right, so the first question comes from Ashley, and she asks, what brands of veterinary cannabis do you trust for your patients? And how can we determine the reliability of a brand if they are new? Wow. Okay. So I don't know. I'm like looking at Kasara because this is like, I know she really wants to answer this, but I know Dawn has a lot to say about it too. So I don't know. Kasara, do you want to start and then Dawn, and then I can throw in some extra stuff and then whomever else wants to bring up as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give just sort of a grounding answer first. Ashley, great question. It is the safety of the patient that's the primary driver in all of this, whether we're looking to increase well-being or actually work within a disease condition. And so knowing which molecules are going into your patients, good and bad, no heavy metals, please, no pesticides, please, is really, really essential. So bravo for asking the question initially, knowing that not all brands are creating their products equally, and that it really is an important part of cannabis medicine to make sure you're evaluating that safety aspect. I'll address it from really the pet parent knowledge side, harm reduction education. Working with a brand that's very open about their certificates of analysis is our first question that we ask. Can we see your lab reports? How detailed are your lab reports? And then how willing the company is to engage in discussion and conversation. How transparent are they about their sourcing, how they're actually processing their products. I'm lucky in that I'm in Colorado, so we have some amazing brands that are also really invested in community development and disaster response. So we have an opportunity to really see what's going on in some of those industries, can visit farms, etc. So I will just offer that as the first round of answers. Ask for a COA, actually look at the COA, and then engage with the company in some way to ask those questions that may still not be covered even on your lab report.
Thank you. Dawn, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I can add a lot. And part of the reason that I can add a lot, because for me, product quality begins the process of both safety and efficacy. And Kasara already alluded to that. And I think that is one of the biggest issues that we have to battle with these compounds. When we started understanding that CBD products were being marketed to animals, and Lance may weigh in as far as the illegalities of those, because none of them are really legal since they're not approved drugs and they're not generally recognized as safe. We began to understand that there was no guidelines to clients or veterinarians regarding the quality product. And I think one of the major reasons this is such a good question is it helps us remember that most veterinarians don't even understand that. Most veterinarians do not understand that there is no pre-market mandated regulation mandating assessment of these products. And that's not going to change. And I'm not sure that we want it to change, in part because that's going to bring the price of these products up really high. So helping our clients figure out what is a good product is probably one of the most fundamental questions that we can ask. And so I'm going to answer from a practical standpoint. I do agree, a transparent company, but I'm just going to warn you that certificates of analysis can be made on PowerPoint in a blink of an eye. And just because something has a certificate of analysis does not mean that it's a quality product. One of the things I encourage is making sure that the lab, for example, is one that's USDA certified. And there's, the website that talks about which labs have been USDA certified to demonstrate the hempness, if you will, of these products. But the other thing that I'm going to encourage you to do, in the class that we talked about, the National Animal Supplement Council actually has a list of manufacturers that have gone through a relatively robust assessment of their quality control procedures, and those quality control procedures have to apply to all of the products that company makes. So that's one thing you can send your clients to first step. If they're not on that list, then we don't go there. The other thing I always answer is, okay, if a company has supported a clinical trial that has made it through the peer review process, then that is a product that at least initially I'm going to have comfort with. And so we go back to Colorado and the products that they have worked with, and they're not just Charlotte's Web. And I forget what the other companies are that they've worked with, Elevet out of Cornell. You just have to assume that there's some level of competency with those products if they've made it through a peer review process in an assessment. And then the other thing I'm going to say, and then maybe we can get some dialogue going here, the other thing I did is consumerlab.com, and that's a laboratory. It's a for-profit website where they actually assess dietary supplements for people, but they'll also do it for animals. And they actually had a pretty darn good write-up on cannabinoids, and they've looked at many products, probably about 30. They've looked for content, is it accurately labeled, and as far as the milligrams of CBD in them. And they've also looked for some contamination, but they can't look for every contamination. And so I think that that's a good place for clients to go. The problem is that is it's not a free site. You have to actually have membership there. And so one of the things I would recommend is for all of you that are in integrative medicine, have a subscription to that site, because I think they're great. And I like to be able to reach out to that site and bring information to the client. Then I'm going to say one more thing. That website, one of the reasons I like it is, there's nothing unique about CBD products for animals. So if I go to that website and I find that they looked at Swanson CBD and they found it to be one of the cheapest, but the best quality, there's no reason that can't be used in an animal, because CBD is CBD. And right now there's nothing special about these products until we start seeing some good science saying, hey, this is the best vehicle to deliver CBD. And we just don't have consensus on that yet. And then the last thing I'm going to say is, if it were my pet, which is always my gold standard, my pet were suffering from seizures, and I wanted to make darn sure I had a good quality product, I'm going to use Epidiolex, because I don't have to worry about any of the issues of quality, and I can get a high concentration there. And I love that Trina is giggling, but I think that that's probably what I would do. Okay, so open up the question for dialogue.
To each their own,
That's
right?
Exactly right.
I'd rather go down to the farm. No. So, and Kazara's laughing because she'd go down to the farm too. But that's the nice thing. We all have different opinions. And so, just to add a few things, I really like you both. It was great because you both kind of had different things you talked about. And so now everyone's hearing kind of different perspective. I would say a few things regarding COA, totally, they can be a lie. That it can happen in anything. So but I like the idea of looking at high quality labs, making sure they have the credentials that they need to be able to run the samples appropriately. And what I think you sometimes also get is there's no batch number, there's no expiration date. Like those are things you need to start looking at in COAs, because oftentimes it will be something that expired like 5 years ago. And the batch number is like whited out, or, stuff looks sketchy. So pay attention to that. I agree regarding, Don, you mentioned, looking at companies that have gone through peer review trials. I think that's really helpful. The one thing I would just put out there, though, is you really need to read those papers carefully. So, and I know you know this is your jam, so I know you get that, and you talk about that even during your lecture. And the importance of doing that is, critically reviewing these art publications very carefully, because were the folks that created the product involved in the design of this trial? That's a little scary sometimes when they are. And then what was the actual design of the trial? Was it something that could have worked, but just didn't work because they designed it really poorly? And so does that mean that product isn't going to work? It could very well work. And then I think we see that sometimes with when you divide the researchers and the practitioners or the clinicians, right? We as the clinicians, and I say we because I like to kind of straddle both, but at the end of the day, I'm a clinician. And I think, Don, you're a little bit more of a researcher, right? And so I think there's like, if we could put our brains together and say, hey, in clinics, I see this work. So don't give it 4 hours before because it won't work. And you're like, oh, wait, the half-life, that might make, together we could, it would actually, I think you'd produce really high quality clinical trials that have a much more chance of positive results than just kind of going for broke and hoping it will work. Because that's, I think, sometimes what happens when researchers don't talk to clinicians. So that's kind of my thing. Also talking to your friends and your vets and things like that, like just reputation, word of mouth. Like I've had great response, like a COA may look great, but every time I try this product for seizures, it never works. Or it's odd. This particular one causes anxiety in every patient. And it's odd because they don't have terpenes that they tested. Perhaps the terpenes in this product is actually causing the anxiety. It has nothing to do with the amount of CBD. Therefore, I'm saying the COA looks great, but there's something that's missing, which is an entire terpene interpretation, right? So talking to people that use it will be helpful in kind of guiding. And then the last thing I'll add to what you said, Don, is there's nothing wrong. Like what makes you comfortable is using an isolate product. And at first I was like, no way, you got to use full spectrum. And let's talk about terminology. Full spectrum, meaning it really should have everything that the plant is grown to have, right? All the cannabinoids and terpenes and flavonoids. Really, that's not the truth. Full spectrum means it probably has CBD along with THC and maybe something else, or absolutely nothing, because it's never accurate. Broad spectrum is supposed to mean, right, it has CBD and maybe one other cannabinoid, but doesn't have THC. And then isolates. And I think as a researcher, Donna, I can see how you go into like, we prove that the isolate works. Epidiolex works for two different seizure disorders in pediatrics, definitively true. And then I look at it and say, but look, these other cannabinoids have anticonvulsant activity. These terpenes have it. But there's something about, there are going to be some cases that the isolate will work really well in. And then there's some where you're going to need something a little bit more robust or complex to work, the ones that are more refractory, that aren't responding. And I'm not saying they need all this other stuff. They may just need one other cannabinoid or whatever it may be. And I know you brought this up in your lecture, and your glasses of wine were perfection when you talked about the little bit of alcohol that's in the Epidiolex. And, it's actually more than what you'll find in some of the products out there that are hemp derived that have ethanol, in them, like the ethanol, residual solvent. There's actually more in Epidiolex. And I don't know, Holly, if you can talk a little bit about, and I'm putting everyone on the spot. So just everyone, this is just like a family conversation at this point. We're all sitting on the couch together. Could you talk a little bit about understanding, and I know, Don, you broke down the amount of alcohol in Epidiolex, and there's something safe about it, FDA approved. So I'm not negating that in any way. I'm just thinking about, Holly, what are your thoughts about alcohol, like giving, say, a product that's for seizures that are 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5 milligrams per kilogram BID to an animal for years? What's the potential complication to the patient if they're getting exposure to ethanol? And Do you know the amount of ethanol? I can't remember, Holly, if you remember, or Don, you want to tell Holly because I can't remember the exact amount.
I think they're going to get 10 milligrams of ethanol for each milligram. I mean, it was pretty high for each dose of CBD. So it was a substantial amount, not more. And there are many drugs that, I shouldn't say many, but quite a few drugs that use alcohol as their vehicle. So, but it still was enough for me to go, okay, we need to let people know. I mean, I'll get into my slide and show it or talk about it. I should have had it open, but yeah, I'd like to hear Holly's comments.
Okay. And then after Holly, can you, Don, tell us what drugs in the market? Because I don't know this. What other drugs have that much or about the same amount of alcohol? And are you using it continuously in patients? Because I don't know any of that, and I'm just curious. Holly, please go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, as with everything in this world, the dose makes the poison. And if you are dosing in very small critters, or especially as we start to look at some of the exotics, and there have been, I think this corner of our research world is expanding exponentially. There are very few papers regarding exotics, and some of the most interesting ones that I've read recently have been in Hispaniolan parrots or Amazonian parrots. And as we start to consider dosing smaller creatures that we weigh on a gram scale in grams instead of our larger Labrador retrievers who come in at 35 kilos on a good day. We really need to take into consideration the carriers that are in these particular products. But when we look at alcohol specifically, dogs and cats in the companion animal world, if we just narrow it down to that, behave a lot more like small children in the human world with their exposure to alcohol and their likelihood of developing a narcotic-like effect and risks for hypoglycemia and metabolic acidosis with that. Typically about 1 ml per kilo of a 95% ethanol solution will be a dose that is high enough in a companion animal, a young adult healthy companion animal, to lead to a dose of concern for alcohol intoxication. The signs are what you would expect: CNS depression, ataxia, bradycardia, hypotension, hypothermia, and respiratory depression in severe enough cases. But then in line with what you see with pediatric children, metabolic acidosis and hypoglycemia. It is not common with alcohol-based medications, especially those that are FDA approved or those that have oversight to them. The amount of alcohol typically tends to be relatively small. But again, I think we have to take into account the size of our patient too, because we don't have the benefit that human medicine has where the size of their patient is generally average and doses are generally relatively stable in that population versus in our critters, we dose adjust per the inner dog, sometimes per body surface area. But if it's 10 milligrams per dose and we're looking at 1 mg per kg of a 95% solution, that would be 950 milligrams of ethanol per kilogram of dog body weight would be of concern in that situation. Alcohol intoxication, depending on the dose, can have signs that last for 12 hours in mildly affected cases, but out to 36 hours in severely affected cases. And some of those creatures need some pretty impressive support. From my corner of the world, I think it becomes more of a concern if they actually get into the entire bottle. If we have a pet owner that doesn't take the adequate steps to put their medications in a safe space, and we're seeing much more of this nowadays as we're getting into, I call it the palatable pharmacy of veterinary medicine, with all of the chewables and flavored solutions that have come out. These overdoses can be quite impressive and they're becoming much more frequent. So a lot of this comes down to client education. Let's put this in a safe space. Let's tuck this into a cupboard. Certainly a light controlled cupboard too can be helpful with a lot of these solutions as well. But that was a very long-winded answer to say short of it. Dose makes the poison. It depends on your patient. And if we're getting into small critters or looking into exotics, we really may need to look at some of those carriers. Does that answer the question? Does that make sense?
I think that was awesome. Like, I'm like, hats off. Thank you. That was really, I was like taking notes. I was like, 1 milligram. So thank you for that. That was awesome. Gary, it looks like you got a yellow hand up.
I do. My hand is yellow right now. Thank you. I just wanted to just touch on this, from perhaps an herbalist perspective. Realize that many herbal extracts are extracted in alcohol. It's actually very, very common. And I can just say from personal experience, I've been using many alcohol-based extracts in my practice for years. I do not believe that we have ever seen an instance of any sort of acute toxicity, and certainly no suggestion of any kind of chronic issues as well. Because at the end of the day, I mean, we're not giving that much volume wise to these animals. So needless to say, a lot of this depends on, how much, in this case of CBD, how much CBD is in a mill of that and is in a mill of that alcohol extract. Because not only is that potentially a problem if you're giving a lot of volume and thus a lot of alcohol, it also becomes just flat out impractical because alcohol tastes terrible. And your average patient is not going to be overjoyed to take something, a large volume of anything that tastes like alcohol. So you wind up having to give small volumes anyway. But I just wanted to throw that out there that this is not the only alcohol-based herbal extract that you're going to encounter out there. And real world wise, it doesn't really seem to be a problem.
And I'll add to that too. In 10 years in toxicology specifically, I've never had a case of medication, prescription medication, or supplements that contain alcohol personally that have led to intoxication or poisoning. It's usually hand sanitizers or honestly alcoholic beverages, or consumer goods that are on the cosmetic side that have higher concentrations of alcohol that are of concern. Because if you take into account 950 mg per kg, a mil per kilo of 95% ethanol, it takes quite a lot for your normal sized canine or feline patient to be of issue. It'd have to be a tiny creature for that to be worried. And I agree, we don't usually worry about additive effect on our side either. So yeah.
So I'm still looking for the alcohol contents. As soon as I find that, I will tell you. Sorry.
Oh, that's great. Okay. Does anyone else want to bring anything up on that topic, or should we move to a different topic? There's no open questions. Oh, Kasara, with your yellow hand, please.
Thanks. I got to both do my hand and my mute button. Trina, it might be a good time to chat about palatability since Gary kind of shifted that. I think that's probably the next question that frequently comes up is, all right, great product, but my cat won't take it. So what are we gonna do about that? So if you want to shift the conversation there, I'm happy to chat there.
Yeah, go for it. Go for
I
it.
think that's kind of always a fun one. Holly, I love your palatable pharmacy. I hadn't heard that phrase before, but I love it. It's such an interesting piece of the landscape, I think, that me and my team see, because we are sort of in the middle of lots of companies trying to figure out what sells and what is useful and what practitioners want to use, et cetera. And so you see a lot of different formulations and things being tried. I think cannabis offers such a beautiful opportunity for cooperative care because you are usually dosing consistently, and it's kind of that thing that you need to figure out from the beginning. And Trina, we don't have to go down this road, but you know that my work is so much in the patient's environment, internal environment, emotional environment, and how that complements the molecules that we're putting into their body. So often we'll say to our clients, if it's stressful for your animal to dose it this way, let's find something else. If you're stressed, if your animal's stressed, let's find a different way to interface with this medicine, because what we're trying to do is create sort of a balance and a regulation in that animal's environment. And if the act of giving the molecule that's going to help is sort of disrupting that, it seems to be a bit counterproductive, particularly when we're in the cats and the kitties and the very picky dogs. If that becomes a stressful moment in that family unit, we see that the case is usually not successful because we don't have compliance, we don't have feedback, follow-up, etc. So I love the companies that can do a great job on their palatability, but also give good information about safety. And that's a hard compromise to meet sometimes.
Dawn, did you want to bring something?
No,
Okay.
I was actually gonna, so our study in the cats with the Epidiolex, we actually didn't have much of a challenge getting it down, but it was just a single dose with those kitties. So I don't think that that's a fair assessment of how well they would tolerate it. I got a cat walking on my computer, sorry.
Yeah, I do. I think I agree with you, with everyone. I mean, I think, and Kasara, we've talked about this. I think cats can be challenging for sure, and running around the house yelling at your cat trying to shove cannabis down their throat isn't a way to go. So I've taken the approach, honestly, like In a dog, you can usually just do that if you need to, but in a cat, it's really finding creative ways like you do with all medications in cats, right? And trying to put it, what I have a lot of success with is telling them to use those like true, little gross paste stuff. And then, right, and then like I tell them, my clients call them like we call them churu sandwiches. And so like they put a little bit on the plate, and then they put a little cannabis and then the churu on top. And that seems to work with like 90% of the cases. And then when they don't work, sometimes we just go to a treat. I just say, you know what, like I really wanted THC. So, oh yeah, we'll talk about this, but like I really wanted THC, but these treats don't have it. We're just getting CBD or CBG or a combination. Or, I always say something is better to get, because we really don't know what a cannabinoid will do on its own. I think it's always ideally we want this combination, but if you just gave a CBD treat to an animal and they felt better, why did you have to give them all these other cannabinoids? And I think sometimes just starting with that and saying, what's going to work? How can you get this into your pet? I oftentimes during my consults, owners will just show me what they have. And instead of having them go order something else that I think might be better, the truth really is we're still at the infancy of figuring out what milligrams are going to work for what diseases and which cannabinoids are going to work and at what combinations. And even then, it still is going to be somewhat personalized for that patient. Therefore, just getting something into that patient and seeing, really assessing the response is going to be very, very important. Okay. I know Don, you just put something in there in the chat. Was it about?
Yeah, so for each milligram of CBD that the patient receives, it's 0.8 milligrams of ethanol. So it's to me,
almost a 1-to-1.
Yeah, and I don't know, Holly, if you want to respond to that, but that's quite a bit lower than I'd implied.
Yeah, that is quite low. So let's say you have a 2.72 kilo Yorkie and you're looking at 950 milligram per kilogram. That's 2,580 milligrams of ethanol. If we've got 0.8 milligrams of ethanol per meg of CBD, we're going to divide that by 0.8. That'd be 3,230 milligrams of CBD that you'd have to get into that little Yorkie to be an issue on the ethanol side. It doesn't seem practical, does it? Yep, that's quite low.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. That like made me feel better. Thank you.
Yeah. Slide. And let me offer a comment. And I want to, now I get that I do research, but I've also run the therapeutic drug monitoring lab and I do some clinical medicine as well. I do not want to negate what can be a very important component of herbal medicine and the entourage effect and the other phytochemicals that are in whatever hemp product you're dealing with. But I think one of the challenges that we have is coming back to the quality of the product and what is actually in there. And I am going to come back to the idea of the clinical trials. And Trina, I love what you said about making sure that it's a good clinical trial. When we're reviewing clinical trials, and I'm not talking about evidence of efficacy here, what I'm talking about is evidence of here's a quality product. One of the things that we need to look for in those papers, and this is for the participants as well as panelists, is did the authors provide evidence that they know what the patients got? In other words, in that paper that we're talking about, irrespective of whether or not they found a clinical effect, whether or not they did a good job with statistics, whether or not they had a good sample of good power to the study, did they tell us what the patients were getting and how did they prove to us what the patients were getting? And they knew that. And that, I think, can go a long way to answering the question, if this was used in a study, can I feel comfortable bringing it to my patient?
I mean, that is something that we unfortunately find all the time. This worked amazing, and they got a cannabis tincture. And you're like, well, what's inside of it? Is there THC? Is there CBG? Or is there CBD? Like, we have no idea. So I agree. I mean, that unfortunately was the beginning, right? When you started to see case reports and things coming out like that. And I want to add that we need to really differentiate. Well, you brought this up initially, Dawn, was like differentiate between when we say cannabis, again, are we talking about hemp derived? Are we talking about marijuana derived? And how you evaluate safety for each of those is actually different, right? Because you're not going to pull up a COA as easily. You might on some cases, but oftentimes if it's a marijuana derived product, you're not going to get a COA. You're just going to have to get what the bottle says it is. And they would have done, the hope is if it's in a dispensary in a state that has had appropriate regulations, they've done the appropriate testing to know it's a clean product and is what it says it is. And there's, maximum amounts of THC and things like that. This supports a little bit of what you said, Dawn, is that it doesn't really matter if it's a human or a vet product. For me, I think most of my patients are using human, based products. But the one thing I always am concerned about is if I can't find the inactive ingredients, then they never get it, because I just worry so much. Again, it's back to palatability. People don't like the taste of oil or something, and therefore they throw a bunch of xylitol or something in there. So I won't sleep at night if I don't look and see it. And so therefore they just don't get it. I say, I've looked everywhere. I look online. I cannot find an inactive ingredient. So cannabis is cannabis, meaning the cannabinoids, the terpenes are all the same. I'm okay if it's a human or an animal product. What I'm not okay with are the things that they're adding to it. The flavors and things like that is what worries me. And a lot of my patients will get marijuana derived from dispensaries. Like when I talk to clients all the time, they're in a state where it's legal and they pick up something and I need to go online and look and see what it is, what's in there. And so oftentimes if I can't find it, I don't use it. And I guess if anyone has anything to say, we can talk about it. Otherwise, I was going to say, maybe we should talk about legal stuff now that we're doing hemp and marijuana.
And I would love to hear
Yeah.
Lance's take on the new law, but let me ask you a real quick question, because you said something I hadn't really thought about, the inactive ingredients. And I'm going to actually pose a question to the panelists. Coming back to this idea of human versus animal dietary supplements, would you have more confidence in the listing of inactive ingredients being truthful in a human dietary supplement versus an animal supplement?
Great question. I would probably say if it was for me, I'm going to speak for me, and then everyone can tell what they want to think. But, and Holly, I see your hand. I would say if it says veterinary formulated or veterinary endorsed, because I know all of us and we're all like type A and like can't sleep at night if we don't do something. So because I know our community, I trust that. If it says that, I'm just like, thank God. It's like a sister looked at that. I'm okay. Or a brother, like that. I feel that's for me. So that's how I would answer that question. But anyone else feel free. Holly, I don't know if you want to say something about that or.
I just wanted to quick speak to the xylitol comment, because it's very second nature for me to look at inactive ingredients for xylitol and oftentimes forget to mention it. And I'm really, really glad that you mentioned that. There are several products on the human market that are not labeled as sugar-free and in fact do contain sugar in the ingredients list, but also contain xylitol. And they don't make that xylitol apparent until you look at the inactive ingredients. And these aren't necessarily products that we would be using therapeutically in our veterinary patients, but thank you for mentioning that, because we have run across several products where that is the case. And we've had amazing luck with those manufacturers, those companies being very helpful and being very open about their xylitol content. Even on a Sunday morning, bright and early, I will be chatting for consult on the case with the vet on the phone, and they'll be emailing me back live time to let me know if there's xylitol content. So yes, eyes to the bottle, look at those inactive ingredients and make sure there's nothing else there to worry for.
But so the question I guess I would have is, and part of the reason I'm asking this is one of the things Consumer Lab did many years ago is they looked at pet products, and I forget, it was glucosamine or it was SAMI, I think it was SAMI. They looked at the pet products and then they looked at the human products, and in general the pet products did much more poorly because they were mislabeled. And I do think that companies that are not reputable are more likely to be cavalier when they're dealing with animals, because they're just animals. And that's part of the reason I raised the question, because is it more likely we'll see misinformation on the label of inactive ingredients of animal quote unquote supplements?
Kasara.
I'll just speak again from a Colorado perspective, but also we're able, fortunate to consult globally and interface with a lot of different states. And I'll just say that cannabis industry has some very smart, what can I do to not get this on a COA or not be caught? So I think from my perspective, it's ethics of the company. Holly being able to find them on the phone when you need them to be able to ask, because there are some sketchy things that just don't get caught. So I don't have a preference on my side other than connecting with the company and really knowing, which is a privilege for us because we, don't have a product connection. We're product neutral, but it allows us to really take a step back and say, okay, are you being truthful? Are you giving me the information that I'm wanting? And also, are you caring for the pet parent who's actually your customer and your client?
Great. Gary, is there anything you want to bring up? I just know that you might want to say something about this before we go into legal. I just didn't know.
No, I appreciate that, but I mean, I think this is very well covered. So yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
The women are speaking enough on the topic, so.
As usual, I am spoken for.
Yeah.
I love it.
All right. So why don't we talk a little bit about the rescheduling? I mean, this is kind of a hot topic. Lance, do you want to start off and talk a little bit about and inform the audience a little bit about the rescheduling, what's going on federally?
Sure. Yes. On May the 1st, the DEA issued some paperwork basically, and an open letter that said that they are going to be publishing in the Federal Register a notice of final rulemaking to reschedule all cannabis, really marijuana and THC as well, into a Schedule 3. So from Schedule 1 to Schedule 3. So, we expect the normal Administrative Procedures Act. We have a notice and comment period, and then eventually a final rule. Usually this takes anywhere from 8 to 12 months, just kind of generally speaking. There have been some rescheduling attempts in the past that have been unsuccessful, but I think that, really this time the public sentiment and all of that is probably in a place where the rescheduling, will occur. I'll let you all speak to, the implications on the industry. But certainly, the popular press, has been talking quite a bit about, the ability for researchers to handle THC again, for the first time, to really open the door to some research and basically just be able to handle the medication, the drug without fear of federal prosecution.
And I just want to confirm that really that's about the only thing this does to help us, right? Because it's not really going to change the playing field for the consumer, because it's still going to have to follow Schedule 3 rules. So other than making it easier for researchers, which is a good thing to research THC, this is really not going to impact much more, is it?
Yes, Don, that's what I see. I mean, it doesn't really, eventually it could make it easier to have some, FDA approved drugs, come through. But really, when I read it, when I think about it, it's really, for me, it's the ability for researchers to handle the drug as a Schedule 3. And so, in the grand scheme of legal things, I mean, there's just baby steps, and so, the fact that the DEA is positioning themselves, the fact that the DEA has exercised enforcement discretion, pretty judiciously over the last, 6, 7, 8 years. It's another signal that says that the DEA doesn't see this as their, as their forte, the war on drugs, if you will. So I mean, it kind of follows in lockstep with a lightening of the DEA's stance on, cannabis altogether. Really what when I see the DEA take action, I really see things like mislabeling. I really see actions against manufacturers or distributors or sellers or marketers of cannabis containing substances that are mislabeling or are using deceptive marketing techniques. It's not really, I don't see them, and I don't see enforcement actions against individual veterinarians, practitioners, et cetera. So like I say, it's just kind of an overall lightening of the kind of a back step from the DEA from fully prosecuting, cannabis type things.
And we want to be clear that we're talking specifically about marijuana, right? So marijuana being descheduled or rescheduled in this case.
Yes, yeah,
Is
yeah.
not
So yeah,
hemp derived, right? So I just want to make
yeah,
sure that everyone
And
understands that.
THC, right? So
yeah.
it-
Yeah, I want to be
it-
very
Well,
clear. So yeah, the
but THC is
2018
not
farm.
derived from hemp, right? So if THC is less than or equal to 0.3% THC, it can still be used in clinical trials. We know it because it's happening right now, and they're not using, the DA is not getting involved. If it's over a certain amount and it's considered more of a marijuana product, then that's where the rescheduling is happening. So I just want to make sure that we're all understanding, we're talking about rescheduling marijuana. We're not talking about rescheduling hemp derived.
Right. So
Yeah,
what my
precisely.
important point was that it's not just marijuana, it's THC. So if I, as a researcher, I could not get THC. I didn't want marijuana, I wanted THC, and I couldn't do it. But
You
now
could,
I
yeah,
could not.
you
But
could
now
at, you could at a really small amount though. I think if my understanding is if it's derived from hemp and is under a certain amount, it can be legally transported, but it has to be under a certain amount. If you're needing enough to do a research project, then I think you need to be very careful. But even with like when we could ship THC if it was hemp derived at lower amounts. That was very legal because it was still under the Farm Bill in that case. And like Gary Casara, speak if there's anything that's not making sense to you, but there's researchers doing research on THC-based products right now that are hemp derived, and that's still considered legal. So you are correct. It's THC specifically, but it's THC derived from marijuana that is being rescheduled. That is my understanding. I don't know, Jeff, Gary, if you guys feel differently or if I'm saying it wrong, because I don't know
Yeah.
if Dawn,
It's the molecule. It's the molecule THC, and specifically derived, from marijuana. So the
marijuana.
rescheduling. Yep. So the Controlled Substance Act, is, I kind of jokingly, put it in the course. It misspells marijuana, but that is the substance that we're talking about rescheduling.
But is Dawn right that like if I were to derive a ton of THC from hemp, at least is what I always thought, if I derived a ton of THC from hemp and it was a large amount, that would be illegal for me to then be shipping that and doing research on a large amount of hemp, even if it's derived, a large amount of THC, even if it's derived from hemp, because
Well, that's because it's not 0.3% at that point.
It would be over the 0.3%. But as long as it's under that, it can be, it's totally legal, right?
I think sorry.
It's not a scheduled substance. I mean, as far as legality, that's another conversation. But it's not. It's not when we're talking about THC levels less than 0.03 derived from hemp. Yes, that is open for research. It's not a scheduled drug. That the 2018 Farm Bill changed that. We're talking about moving marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3.
So I'm just going to ask for clarification, and I think maybe I'm splitting hairs. Trina, I get what you're saying, but whenever you start talking about extracting THC from hemp, being legal versus not, you transition away from the 0.3% that's allowable. So to me, what you are saying is it's legal to study hemp regardless of what's in it because it has less than THC that it's supposed to have. So it's not I guess what I'm hearing from you is it's okay to study THC as long as it's in a product that is hemp. And I think that's
less than like Elvet. That's the great example because you brought them up with all their trials. They have, I mean, depending on their batch, right? They have anywhere between probably 1.2, 1.3, all the way up to 1.8 milligrams per ml of THC, which is not a small amount because I see hemp products all the time and that's not a small, and that's ships everywhere, right? So, and it's in clinical trials everywhere, but it's certainly less than 3 milligrams per ml, which is closer to the 0.3,
right.
percent. Okay, thank you. But that was a great, actually very interesting conversation.
Well, I think it's something it's worth noting because there is a lot of confusion about this, and I think it's very confusing for us. It's very confusing for veterinarians, and then lastly, it's going to be very confusing for clients. So there is this push in states where THC is not legal, to use, hemp derived products, gummies, edibles, vapes, things along those lines that contain more than 0.3 THC, but they are hemp derived and they're extracted to stronger concentrations, just like you're talking about, Trina. But that these shops are proliferating everywhere in states where it's not legal. They call it, Delta 9, Delta 10, kratom, stuff like that. But it doesn't make it, they're still not legal. And so that's where the confusion comes in is the DEA is really just saying, hey, we just don't have the bandwidth or the real want to exercise our enforcement capabilities. But these aren't legal. So every now and then you'll see a state DA or a state attorneys general come in and shut down these shops, but they just don't have the bandwidth either. So the legality, it's one of those things where technically it's legal, or technically it's illegal, but no one's really getting called out on it, on these stronger concentrations. The new scheduling would basically remove that and just say it's going to be a schedule, whereas hemp right now is not scheduled at all. Marijuana would be, at regardless of concentration, will be a Schedule 3.
So how does that affect vets? Like it being a Schedule 3, can you talk to that? Like, so the vets can hear about, now there's a Schedule 3, how does that affect veterinarians?
Well, since there has to be a drug, a legally marketed drug, that will allow veterinarians to take advantage of that. Taking a drug that is not Controlled Substance Act, you've got something that you're bringing in from a distributor, you're putting in your lockbox. Those are legally marketed and legally regulated drugs. Marijuana, there are not currently that many legally approved or approved drugs. So it's kind of like, okay, I went to a dispensary and I bought XYZ. We're still not going to put that in our controlled drug logs, because it's not an approved drug to start with, et cetera. So it is a bit of a unprecedented situation where, okay, it's a scheduled drug, but there's not a legally approved pathway to get it into our controlled drug lockbox. So to answer your question directly, I don't really see it changing for veterinarians quite a bit until we start using true Schedule 3 drugs under a legal marketing status.
But we could do that with Marinol, right? Because Marinol is THC, and right now I just looked it up. It's Schedule 3. So veterinarians can use that via extra label. I don't know that there's any barriers to that anywhere.
No, there's not. Legally, there's not. That's why I said, there's very few. There's very few examples there. And so, you could take that drug in, you would put it in your controlled drug box, you would, use your record keeping, dispense it out, et cetera. Completely fine on that. But it doesn't change, if we're talking about getting marijuana derived substances, from a local pharmacy, if it's legal in your state, et cetera, that's not going to change anything for veterinarians at all until there are other drugs approved like Marinol.
Yeah. And we'll just keep in mind that, remember, Marinol is synthetic. So it's not plant derived there. And if you look at some of the studies, it's a lot of the synthetics are known to be stronger than the plant derived. So keep that in mind. That dosing is not a 1-to-1. Like there's some studies looking at that on the human side for sure. And I see Holly nodding her head because she knows synthetics can be really scary on the veterinary side. Gary, your hand's up, and I know you have something to say about this topic.
I do, but Kassar's yellow hand has been up forever. So
I thought that she just had it up and never put it down, but perhaps I'm wrong.
Oh, well, there is that. I don't know. Maybe she just likes her yellow
I do
hand.
have a quick comment to make.
Okay.
And then I'll put my hand down. I just wanted to emphasize for all of our clinicians who are listening and just diving into cannabis and kind of wondering what this field looks like. Many times, all of my patients come to me with a product. So many times we're sort of past that first step of us even having that discussion. We're trying to figure out what are we actually already working with. So for your minds, as you begin thinking about how to interface with cannabis and the different molecules, make sure you know which molecules are in the product. So you do your own research so that you feel confident of which molecules you're playing with. And know that when we're talking about THC, just as this amazing discussion has pointed out, you can absolutely find THC in the very common products like Elvet we've mentioned. And from on the clinic floor, Elvet to the big dog, like if you do the package dose, they'll get intoxicated. They will absolutely. We see quite a few follow the package label of Elvet, intoxication happen. It's just a naive patient receiving that much THC can absolutely result in intoxication. So just so that you know that from safety and kind of counseling your pet parents in advance. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary, and then Don.
Okay, so just to maybe take Lance's point one step further. I mean, clearly Lance is absolutely correct from the standpoint of, from a veterinary perspective, the Schedule 3 thing doesn't mean much until there's an actual approved pharmaceutical. But walk that path for a second and think what that means to veterinary medicine when pharma companies are actually coming out with approved Schedule 3 cannabis products. You know, up until now, cannabis in veterinary medicine has really been to the purview of veterinarians who wanted to go out of their way to learn about this product, figure out what the legal landscape is, see what they can do, kind of walk the line a little bit, so we can help our patients. The second you got, you know, Elanco, Bayer, Pfizer, whomever out there, you know, pushing a product like this, the second you walked into Western Veterinary Conference and there are approved pharmaceuticals that have THC or, you know, that have cannabis in them, that is an absolute sea change for veterinary medicine as a profession. You know, you think about it, up till now, I mean, if you wanted to use cannabis in your patients as a veterinarian, you kind of really have to educate yourself about what cannabis is and how it works and all of the various sort of, you know, intricacies that come with it. How many veterinarians really have a strong grip on how most of the pharmaceuticals in their office work? I'm not going to make that claim, to be quite honest with you. And all of a sudden, cannabis is going to be like that too. And in truth, that's a good thing. It's a good thing because it makes cannabis available not only to the entire veterinary profession, but it makes cannabis available now to the entire pet owning populace through a veterinary channel. So ultimately, this is going to be a very good thing, but clearly there's going to be an understandable lag between when the FDA says, okay, ready, set, go, and when something or some things wind.
Okay. Sorry, that's the cat. Don, thank you, Gary. That was awesome. Thank you for saying that. Very passionate too. I loved it.
I just wanted to clarify, Trina, you referred to the Marinol being synthetic THC, and it is, but it's still THC. So I think that we need to be careful. I totally agree that synthetic cannabinoids present a much greater risk of harm, but THC is THC regardless of where it comes from. And so I just wanted to clarify whether or not we are implying that THC in Marinol is more dangerous because it's synthetic versus THC that's been derived from marijuana, because it shouldn't be. It may be a potent product, but it's still THC.
It shouldn't be, but I believe that it is. So if you look at I think, and maybe Holly, you'll tell me if I'm right or wrong about this, but I thought the THC that's synthetic from Marinol specifically, but many of the synthetics are full agonists. And is THC derived from cannabis, let's call it marijuana or hemp, is a partial agonist. I thought, I could be very wrong, but I thought that was
very honest in this situation.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Then it's not
okay,
THC.
I have to be very honest in this situation. I don't know what isomer Marinol is. Do you know if it is Delta 9 THC?
Yeah, believe it is.
I think it is, but I think it might be a full agonist. That's, I think. I remember
I
reading about.
honestly haven't personally looked into Marinol specifically into studies to look at potency, but I can speak to synthetics in and isomers and your semi-synthetics, which some of us call isomers, some of us call semi-synthetics with your delta 8s, delta 9s, HHCs, THCPs, THCOAs. They have varying degrees of potency and they'll bind the receptor in varying ways. Your synthetic cannabinoids that are not legal per se, not FDA approved, certainly, and typically not manufactured stateside, but shipped over stateside, are usually going to carry some pretty creative names to them and are typically full agonists to the CB1 receptor and can be up to 800 times more potent than Delta 9 THC can be. Variable to that, 10 to 800 times more potent. The average is about 100 times more potent. So yeah, those are much more dangerous, but I can't speak to Marinol specifically. I'm so sorry. I didn't look into that.
No. I don't, I know that when I was doing research on this, because there's a study that was done where they took two different synthetic cannabinoids that are approved, and they compared them to the anti-nausea effect of traditional, this is for chemo-induced vomiting and nausea, the traditional anti-nausea meds. And they found that these patients got a lot more toxicity. And they said it was because they were more, those particular synthetics, but it may not have been Marinol. I know that I have to figure out which ones that they used. They found the rationale was because it was a full agonist, but I can't remember which one. So that's why I couldn't say.
So Marinol is a synthetic delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol. So it is THC, but the only other thing I can potentially address, Holly, is, if it's a racemic mixture, but that's still going to be what's in the marijuana plant anyway. So it is THC. It is delta 9. And so I mean, we need to
pinging the experts here. We so rarely use delta 9 THC as a sole isolate, right? We usually use this in conjunction with other non-intoxicating or minor intoxicating phytocannabinoids that impart an entourage effect, CBD being the big one as an allosteric modulator to CB1 and CB2 receptors to temper a lot of the adverse effects that we see with delta THC. Is it because it's more potent, or is it because it's an isolate? And I think
maybe that's the answer there, because we're missing that balance with the marijuana.
That's huge, right? I mean, that because of the negative allosteric modulation and other ways that it works. I'm going to find something. I feel like I want to find it because I remember that study, because when I published this paper recently on the palliative effects, one of the reviewers said, well, why did all those people get sick? And I remember doing research on it, and I was like, that makes sense. But perhaps, and I remember it being something about it being a full agonist, but let me double check and see. And if I find it, I'll tell everybody. And
bring it to the table. We do have a question in the Q&A from Nathaniel.
Yeah, what is that question? Let's see. Okay, perfect. But that's smart. Okay, have any of you used any of the human prescriptions THC or CBD products in your patients? So we're kind of talking about that now. We're kind of answering it without even seeing Nathaniel's question. So that's saying basically like Marinol. Have we used it in?
Yeah, we have used Epidiolex in a couple of seizuring patients. So especially in large dogs where we wanted to be able to give a more concentrated form of CBD, but also because we wanted to know we had a good product. So we have done that.
And what did you see? Did you see, did it work well?
We saw partial response. There are two dogs, one dog did not, so three dogs. The third dog was a severe epileptic and the clients chose euthanasia, but two of the dogs saw improvement in quality of life. And we started them at 2 mg per kg, and we went to 5 mg per kg with one of the dogs, Q12.
Oh, cool. Okay. I don't know, Kasar, or anyone else? Does anyone else have experience?
I wouldn't work with I would work with a plant-based product. I think it's just better fit for definitely the clients that come to us. When you're working with complex disease processes, so a lot of other conditions going on, individual endocannabinoid system tone, really that entourage effect, background molecular complexity, I think gives so much clinical safety and so much clinical value. I work with plant-derived products.
I'm going to claim unusual privilege in the sense of living and working in Oakland. We have so much access to so many products and so many producers that would literally custom make you anything you want. It's never, honestly, it's never come up. It's never been necessary. So I am spoiled and proud of it.
I mean, I'm equally spoiled. It's Nabalone, Sesmet. That's the one that acts more as a full agonist. Does that ring a bell, Kali, a little bit? Do you remember
Yeah,
that?
that's a different drug, the Nabalone, Marinol.
Yep.
So it's not just THC.
It's totally. But
Nabalone is hardcore synthetic, absolutely. Yep.
yeah, and isn't it FDA approved too, or no?
It is indeed.
It
Yep.
is.
Yep.
It is, but it is not just THC. It's a combination with another synthetic cannabinoid, and it would make perfect sense that is not as safe.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it
Okay.
carries, my understanding is it carries similar labeling to what, not likely similar dosing. I don't know with certainty. I haven't looked at it, but similar labeling and intent to Marinol as well. So just a synthetic variety.
Okay. Thank you. And this is from Nathaniel. I really appreciate your responses. I've not used any of the human products, but I've used several of the veterinary OTC products for about 10 years with generally very good responses, and I'm very skeptical of the synthetic products. Well, I don't know. I think maybe we scared you with this. I don't know what we've done. Scared myself for sure. Yeah, I don't really have a lot of experience. Some of the folks on the East Coast would like some vets or techs would have told me like they've tried Marinol for their before it was legal out there. They've tried it, and I've not necessarily seen it work very well either. That's just again my very like N of 2 or 3. It's never not worked for those, but there's only been a few cases. Holly.
Hey, just quick question for you. What about Sativex? I have no personal experience with this. I'm just curious, have you guys had colleagues or acquaintances across the pond or here in the States that have looked into Sativex at all? It's approved in what, 25 countries, but not the US? Just curious.
There's definitely some clinical trials on Sativex in animals, and they seem to really tolerate it. I mean, if you see that dog trial, it was like they used really high doses and they did great with it. Basically it's a 1-to-1 CBD THC derived from marijuana product. That's what most of the clinical trials in human medicine are in Europe and Israel, that they've used that. So I've not used it. I've not known, but I don't know if anyone, I know, Dawn, there's probably been some trials maybe you've been involved in or you've heard about using that as well.
Sorry, I was looking up Nabalone and I did not hear the question. I'm going to send what Nabalone is in the chat. What was the question real fast? My apologies.
Talking about Sativex, the 1-to-1 CBD THC that's approved in Europe.
Yeah, so no, I'm not familiar with any clinical trials with that. I just was familiar with the pharmacokinetic paper, but other than that, no, I am not familiar with anything that has demonstrated safety or efficacy.
I mean, I will speak to Holly that we use 1-to-1 all the time. I mean, just not that product, but 1-to-1 in general, use lots of times, sometimes with other cannabinoids, some without. It's certainly going to be a little bit of more of a heavy hitter than the 30-to-1s that everyone's seeing nowadays, or even the 10-to-1s. But I think there's definitely a case that it could be very helpful in certain really severe, like neuropathic pain, appetite stimulation, certain diseases where I do think 1-to-1 would be helpful, but not for like a seizure or anxiety or anything like that. I think that seems not reasonable. Jeff, I'm gonna say something. You haven't spoken. Is there anything you want to talk about I want to include you in the family couch chat. Is there anything that you want to talk about? State-wise, federal?
Yeah, I would just say that for those of us in California, and I would like to predict optimistically, but I suspect other states will follow, the current law that permits veterinarians to discuss and recommend cannabis, so this is 0.3% or higher THC, is in force, and the law has mandated the DCC, Department of Cannabis Control, to promulgate rules for animal products. And they have a deadline of a little over a year from now, July of 2025. And for complete disclosure, Trina and Gary and VCS are consulting with them to come up with this language. And for background, the DCC does this for human products. So effectively, the goal will be to have animal products that have some certificate more than what is present now. So that's something to look forward to.
Definitely.
Can I answer Nathaniel's comment
Yeah.
about it is actually derived, it's derived from cannabis, so it's not synthetic, and it's CBD and THC, but not synthetic.
Cool. Well, does anyone have anything else to say? I know we're almost 20 minutes over time. It looks like Kasara, you got something to say, so please tell everyone.
You can always rely on me to have something else to
Yeah,
say, Trina.
always.
I just wanted to mention that from the in-clinic use, I think some interesting things are coming down. I don't know if you've seen it, Trina, Joam's paper on pre-anesthetic use of cannabis. I just sent it to you in the chat in case you want to share
Ooh,
later, but
cool.
I think we're seeing some research that really focuses on in clinic, wait, I'm doing other things to my patients. It has cannabis in it. What should I do? And I think this is really exciting for us as practitioners and clinicians to really understand that if you don't have a complete medical history that includes all the supplements and whatever your pet parents sort of decided on their own, if you don't know that, it is affecting for sure your patient's anesthetic experience. Not saying it's positive or negative, but the knowledge from that complete VCPR perspective, I think cannot be underestimated across any of the supplements, any of the herbals. It's so important for us to truly understand what molecules are being put into our patient so that we can make whatever modifications we need to and make sure they end up safely on the other side. So I'm excited to see that really clinic-based research start to come out, because that's the information that we need. How do we work with it in liver disease, kidney disease? Is it safe? You know, really doing some of those case-based, condition-based research. I'm excited to see.
It's a whopping dose, 6 milligrams per kilogram. So it's saying that 6 milligrams per kilogram of combined cannabinoids were able to reduce the dose of propofol. I'm just reading it to everyone. Propofol necessary for induction by 23% when compared to the control groups. I mean, I don't want to deny that some of my patients might be receiving something like that for seizures, and it's rare, but that's a mighty dose. Because I've never seen it. Like a lot of my cases that were getting radiation and needed propofol, I always thought when that first paper came out on endoscopy, looking at the 250 patients, and it required, remember, significantly less propofol, the ones that were on cannabis. I always thought, well, it's weird. I wonder if dogs are just not affected, because because I haven't seen it doesn't mean dogs are affected. I want to make that clear, but only because many of my patients were on it and getting radiation and things like that. I always thought it was odd. I'd ask the radiation oncologist, do my patients need less propofol? They would always say, no, same amount. But I think they were never on that amount. And it looks like the 2 milligram per kilogram dose probably didn't do that, is what I just looked through the materials and methods. So that's really important information to know, though.
Yeah, mostly I've been using it as a preface when I send my clients that are on cannabis to a fixed facility clinic to have an anesthetic episode, just as sort of this information packet for the anesthetist or the surgeon, just to be aware. I think that's a collegial kindness if I know something about molecules that have been put in the patient, to make sure that that's being passed on. And it's so nice to have just some information to pass on in that context.
Well, and also, what about these are just these cannabinoids. What if you added in other cannabinoids? It may require significantly less to do that, right? Or there's something that has a lot more THC and less CBD. This is like a 20-to-1 ratio. If you had a 1-to-1, you had a Sativax, and then you did 2 mg per kg, that might do it. I mean, we don't know that yet. So that's very good. I'm glad he published that. Thank you for sharing.
Can I also ask of you guys too, as you're sending out these informational packets and chatting with primary care providers and general practitioners about concomitant health conditions. How do you approach concomitant meds when you're talking anesthesia and such too? We know there's a lot of cross-reactivity between receptor systems. So with benzos and opiates and potentially pain medications like gabapentin or dogs who may be on SSRIs and such, is that something that you find that you have to approach in practice as well? Or is it less of a concern for you in practical practice at this point?
I mean, I address it all the time. I just say, here are the mechanisms of potential interaction. I think clinically, we're not seeing it most of the time, but again, clinically, most of these patients are in small doses of cannabis. When you start getting that dose up, I think we probably will see more interactions. So when you're giving 6 milligrams per kilogram of cannabinoids, I think we probably see interactions with lots of things, to be honest, because of the, the amount of cross receptors that we're probably dealing with, and then metabolism and, the implication on metabolism for sure, and the metabolic enzymes.
So I just want to point out that at least in human medicine, if we're looking at epilepsy, total doses of 20 mg per kg per day are not necessarily that unusual. And while there are drug interactions, most of them are limited to the clobazam, that benzodiazepine. And I'm not saying ignore it. We have got to stay on top of that. But we've already seen the paper that came out of Colorado where there really was not a drug interaction between phenobarbital and CBD. There were some changes, but there were not any significant drug interactions. And those were pretty good doses as well. So to me, we've got to pay attention, but I don't necessarily see that there's going to be some major issues that get us in trouble. And I'm looking at the propofol paper here as well. And I guess my immediate reaction is it's good to be aware and we need to be aware, but is that a clinically significant statement as far as the amount of propofol reduction needed for those patients? It's just a good venue for discussion.
Holly, I see yourself off mute.
Also a good paper out there too. The phenobarbital lack of effects on the kinetics with concomitant CBD use was a lovely paper and really comforting to see too. And I've also come across recently a couple of papers regarding other anti-seizure drugs as well, levetiracetam and zonisamide as well, with minimal to no effects on serum drug levels in those cases, which I think is really comforting to see out there. So,
well, especially because on the human side, there's that adult pediatric study that showed interaction with zonisamide. I mean, it was like, stuff you would expect, like the clobazam and the valproic acid. Like, yes, they had elevated liver. And it was like, no one's going to be super surprised about that. But there was an interaction with zonisamide. And so then I always was like nervous about it. So I would tell people about that study and say, just be careful with your dog. And then when the dog study came out, I felt better, right? So and I will say this, keep saying it, like, keep in mind the formulations that were used in that study, because you could flip a formulation around and then have an interaction, because we know that CBD and THC can work on some of the similar either induction or inhibition of certain CYP proteins, and they can work on some, but one of them is going to work a little bit more on one and one is going to work a little bit more on the other. And therefore your ratios and your formulation as a whole may interact with the drug a little bit differently. And I'm speaking as a pharmacologist, as a not pharmacologist. So Don, I feel like you want to say something when I said that.
No. So the zonisamide, it turns out, has some antipsychotic, quite a few anti-dopaminergic. And so I think part of that drug interaction, and we forget about this, we kind of focus so much on the pharmacokinetic drug interactions where we have inhibition of drug. We forget that there can be some pharmacodynamic interactions. And one of the things cannabidiol does is it's an HT1A antagonist. It targets the serotonin receptors big time. And so I think that this interaction with zonisamide may actually be more related to a pharmacodynamic effect as well. So that's another good area of discussion we just haven't really focused on.
That's interesting. I never thought about that. I mean, I know we see it with cannabis and gabapentin all day. Like, that's like a beautiful pharmacodynamic interaction, because it used to be people were afraid. And I said, why not use it to our advantage, right? And that's, why do you have to use trazodone and cannabis? When I say cannabis, I'm saying something that usually has some sort of THC, hemp derived most of the time. Yeah, I use it a lot. There was that paper. Did you guys see that paper that came out looking at gabapentin and CBD cannabis? I don't remember if it was full spec, but they looked at it for neuropathic pain, like dental pain,
Yeah.
right? And it was like it helped with that. And I thought, okay, this is great. Like and I use it for a lot of patients when at night they're having sundowners or they can't sleep. The combination has worked really well.
But you're still going to see potentially some of the same negative, the increased, sedation, those sort of things, which we see with zonisamide potentially because of that other pharmacodynamic interaction. So yeah, interest.
What are your thoughts on Dancitron and CBD or CBDA at the 5-HT3?
Yeah, so I'm 5-HT3. Well, I don't know if so one of the things I have learned about the serotonin receptor, see me covering my eyes, my God, is that a complicated physiological pathway. Every time I get questions about mirtazapine and serotonin syndrome and cyproheptadine, I have to go back and review all of the current information on the receptors because, they tend to be preganglionic versus postganglionic and where their position makes a difference. So I probably have to go back and review that before I feel comfortable answering that. I mean, once I realize that CBD has these effects, now I've got to go back and look at all the other drugs as well that have serotonergic effects. So I can't answer that right now, but it's a great question.
You know what would be great if you could go through all of that, Dawn, and present it to us in such a beautiful chart. So then we could be like, okay, this is the mechanism. This is how it works.
That's actually a really, really good idea, not just for CBD, right? But for all of our CNS active drugs, our gabapentin, our zonisamide, our trazodone. All right, let me ponder that because that's certainly something that could benefit VIN. It's certainly something that could benefit us because we're trying to put together drug interactions. And that is probably one of the most challenging set of drugs to figure out what might happen. That's a really great idea, darn you.
Yes, you made us all happy. Thank you. Look at us. We're like jumping for joy. You made us better clinicians, just the thought of you doing it. So thank you. Okay, does anyone have anything else they want to bring up? Because I know we're about an hour and a half in, and yes, Kassar, of course.
My last one, and then if you give me a prompt, I promise I won't respond. But you're the one who said another question. Mine is just a comment again for people who are beginning to delve into cannabis. We're so excited that you're excited about this. There's so much to learn, so much. It's just a beautiful, beautiful medicine and science. Again, speaking from my perspective, many times owners have started their animals on a product that may not contain the molecules we think it contains. So Holly, you asked me about kind of that education for the clinician, the one in clinic doing some anesthesia. Sometimes that's a really big piece of harm reduction education to give, is that if the clinician's thinking CBD product and they're so geared into CBD product, and yet the pet parent has started their animal on a who knows what, CBG, CBDA, then we begin to have some interactions that we have no idea about. So while I think this paper is amazing and so excited for that, I think it opens the door beautifully for us to have conversations about what else is in that product. Your terpenes make a difference. How are we really assessing that health and safety? So that's a really exciting piece for me, I think.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. No one else has a hands up. And so thank you all. Thank you all. This was fun. I enjoyed it. And I really appreciate everyone's input. And I'm hopeful that the folks that are here and then everyone else that comes and listens to the recording afterwards, able to learn, and feel free that I really do want to do this again at the end of the year. And so feel free to bring your questions then, at the end of the year. We'd love to, clearly, we all love answering questions. It's like, it gets us excited and we learn from each other and we learn from you. So please bring your questions, bring your cases. And by then, who knows where we'll be regulation wise and law wise. There might be some big changes happening at that point. So thank you all and have a beautiful, beautiful night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me be part of this.
Bye. Have a good
night.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a great night.